Hello, I'd like to welcome Kristina Kugler to our podcast today. She's a manuscript editor for Loose Leaf Editorial and Production and has edited author manuscripts that went on to become New York Times bestselling novels. Recently, she provided an evaluation on a fantasy novel of mine, and I was thrilled with her insights on how to improve my story. So I'm really excited to talk with her today. Let's start off, Kristina, with you just telling me a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a professional editor.
So when I was little, I decided that when I grew up, I was going to work at a job where I got paid to read all day long. And at first, I thought I wanted to be an author myself, or maybe a librarian. But as I got older, I realized they didn't get to read all day long. They had to do other things.
Yeah,
But when I went to college, I realized that if you're editing books, you do get to read all day long and get paid for it. And so that's kind of how I decided to become an editor.
that's great. Now, you do both manuscript editing and evaluations. Um, to those who are watching, explain the difference between the two of those.
So, manuscript evaluation is basically an overview of a manuscript, and I just go through major trends or issues that I'm seeing in a work. I'll look at whether characters are working, if the plot is working, if the pace is working. With editing, I actually do several different kinds of editing.
Okay.
I do developmental editing, which is basically the in-depth version of a manuscript evaluation. I'll still look at the same big picture items, but I will give, instead of just one editorial letter for the whole book, I will do that, but also give chapter by chapter feedback, give extensive feedback within the manuscript. Just it's a very intense version of a manuscript
Okay.
evaluation. I also do line editing, which is more clarity of the words and organization. It's more the artistry. That's
Okay.
one of my favorite parts.
Is it?
Yes. And then copy editing, which is more looking at the mechanics, grammar, punctuation, the right spelling, continuity. You don't want your character to leave the house in a tracksuit and then come home in jeans unless they've had time to change in between.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Which of those do you tend to do more of?
Um, I do kind of a big mix, mostly either manuscript evaluations or line editing.
Okay.
Um, but I do all of those.
Okay. Awesome. Um, what have been some of the manuscripts that have been your favorite that you've edited or evaluated, and what made them stand out?
Uh, I would say I love almost every project I'm working on as my favorite at the time. Um, but some real big standouts. I had the chance to line edit Rhythm of War, which is book 4 in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson.
Excellent.
That was such a fun and challenging project because there's such a huge world and the characters are so complex. And it was really, really fun to be able to help refine the language and get it just right to fit the characters and what was happening. And that was very challenging, but very exciting project to work on.
Well, also, what a great opportunity to be part of such a successful book and series, and
Mhm.
that must in itself have just been wonderful.
It was a lot of fun. And then I really enjoy one of my favorite authors is Jancy Patterson, who is also co-authored with Brandon Sanderson on both his Alcatraz versus Evil Librarians series. She wrote the last book in the series, Bastille versus Evil
Okay.
Librarians. And
Okay.
then she's also written in his Skyward series. And she has a lot of standalones of her own
Okay.
that she's written. And she is just a delight to work with. And I love her work and I love working with her.
That's awesome. Um, tell us. Well, you already kind of have it. Maybe tell us some of the other authors that you've enjoyed working with.
So like I said, Brandon's always fun. Jancy's fun. My there is an author that hasn't been published yet that I've worked on several of his books that he's working on, named Ryan McBride,
Okay.
and he should be published. He has a fantastic voice. His characters are compelling, and I keep checking to see if he's published yet because he should be. Yeah, it's fun because I get to work with a mix of indie authors and traditionally published authors. And it's just fun seeing the authors grow when I've gotten to work on multiple projects with them, or just seeing just the fun things that people are working on.
Great. In your opinion, why is it important for an author to have someone else with, expertise, take a look at the manuscript and get that additional insight before they try to publish it or send it to an agent or an editor? Why is that important?
So it's very helpful, I think, because as the author, you know the story you're trying to tell. It's all there in your head. You know everything. You know their motivations. You know why they're doing things they're doing and where you're going. But even the very best authors don't always get that on the page right away.
Yeah.
And your brain is saying, well, of course you would know that this is this because I know this.
Yeah.
But when you have a professional opinion, they can help you see, oh, well, maybe their motivation isn't clear here as I thought it was. Or maybe I didn't realize there's this plot hole here that is making it so my story isn't having the impact that I want it to. Or maybe something isn't as clear on the page for someone who isn't in my head than it is for me who knows everything in this world.
Yeah.
And having that professional opinion can really help you pinpoint where things are working the way you want them to and where they're not quite there yet.
Yeah. And I even noticed as you evaluated mine, I know I have certain bad habits. And I spent a lot of time in one particular habit I have, which is, sometimes I over repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to remove all of those. And you still found some. And that was very helpful to me. I mean, there were a lot of other things that in your evaluation, that's, oh yes, I need to do that. I need to do that. But even when you think what you need to fix, there's going to be things you'll miss. And having someone like you can make all the difference. So.
There was a book I edited where they had had a scene on a bus and then they'd taken it out and rewritten. It was great, but then they accidentally had a reference to them being on the bus that they had missed. And I get to that spot in the story, I'm like, where did this bus come from? It's like, it used to be there, now it's not. I'll get rid of that.
Yeah, exactly. What are the main things you look at when evaluating a manuscript?
So the first thing I always look at is character. I want to know if the characters are working, if their motivations make sense, if they're interacting in a way that makes sense. I look at a lot of what I do is fantasy and sci-fi. So I look a lot about the world building, making sure that that's clear, that I understand how things work, at least as well as the characters do, because sometimes you have instances where it's okay if you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
But it needs to make sense that you don't know what's going on. If you feel like you should, then you probably should understand at least the baseline of where you're at. And then I also look at if the voice is working. If somebody has sent me a manuscript and said, my character is 16 years old and doing this, and I'm reading it and they're speaking like a 12-year-old, then I'm like, unless there's a reason for that, we're maybe looking at a mismatch with your voice.
Yeah.
And things like that. And then I look at plot and making sure that everything's coming together and it's making sense. And then not as much an evaluation. I will mention if I see common grammar issues or word issues, but at that stage, I'm more looking at big picture, and I'll just mention if I happen to see, hey, you might want to take a look at this.
Yeah. Awesome. What are some of the most common mistakes that authors make?
They forget to make all of their characters fully fleshed people.
And how do you suggest to them to make sure they are fully fleshed out?
A great way is to make sure that they're reacting to things and acting like a person would.
Okay.
A lot of times you can draw from your own life. How would I feel right now if this was happening? How does that doesn't always and it's always exceptions, because sometimes it's better to tell than to show if it's something that's not vital to what's going on. There are shortcuts and things that will work better. But a lot of times you want to know, like, how is this feeling coming out in the way that they are acting, the details your character is noticing. Or if they're afraid, do they stop breathing for a second?
Yeah.
How does that feel in their body? Those are things that you can convey on the page to make people feel more real. And I think a lot of times if you add in that emotion, and because by nature, the grand majority of humans are super emotional, even if they don't show it on the outside. Everybody feels things. And when you can have the reader feel that too, those characters come alive.
Awesome. One of the things that when I give presentations or teach classes, on writing, I will suggest that the authors create a history for their characters. I think too often there's not they don't know the backstory, and it's not that you're going to tell the reader the backstory or the history, but if you know that character's history in detail, it helps you make them become more alive and helps you flesh it out. And that I believe that helps show that on the page. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree, because when you're trying to write somebody who feels real, if you know what motivates them, if you know who they are, how they would react, why they're reacting the way they are, then that's much easier to translate to the page because you know them.
Yeah.
If you don't know who they are, then the reader isn't either. And you don't, like you said, you don't have to tell their entire back history. You might, come up with entire 10 pages worth of material that is never on the page, but it informs how, you have a character who loves cats. They're going to notice when there's a cat around. They're going to snuggle a cat, it's not a huge detail, but that informs who they are and what they're doing.
Makes them become more real and, as you said, more fleshed out.
Yeah.
I like that. What are some of the most important things an author can do with their story to make it stand out and engage readers? And maybe we've kind of already talked about that, but anything you would add to that?
Like what you're writing. Sometimes I think new writers sometimes try to write to trends.
Okay.
And if there's not something you're interested, trends come and go so quickly.
Yes.
And so that's all. And publishing is not quick. So it can take more than a year, 2 years to get something published sometimes after it's been accepted. So trying to chase things like that isn't going to help you. Write what you want to read. If you're excited about what you're writing and the story that you're trying to tell, it's going to be a lot easier to translate again that to the page and to make it stand out because it's something you're passionate about and you're excited to see and you're excited to read. And I feel like when you can feel the writer's passion in what they're doing, it's a lot easier to make it a standout book.
Awesome. Any other types of advice like that you'd give? Maybe even authors that aren't beginning, but ones who maybe are on the cusp of,
Get a good writing group.
Yes.
Writing groups are super helpful, and it can't just be anybody, because you need what I have found in writing groups that's super helpful is you want people who both read in the genre that you're working in, because you can have someone who's great comments, but if they don't understand the genre you're writing, it's not going to be as helpful, because there are certain conventions, and you can always break out of things, but there are things that say this is a fantasy novel, this is a mystery novel. And if you don't understand those, then you're not going to give as good advice. So you want someone who understands the genre, someone who is going to be a reader, because you need somebody who's willing to say, I love all of these things. These are what hit right for me. This is the emotions that I was feeling, because it's one of the best things I feel is knowing when the emotional beats that you're trying to get in your reader are hitting, that they're feeling what you're wanting them to feel. And then you also want somebody it's great to have cheerleaders, and that's very important. And, even the most seasoned writer, you need a cheerleader, because publishing's hard.
It is.
But you also need somebody who's willing to say, but this isn't working, and this isn't working. And it's great to have advice on it, but in the end, you are the author. It's your decision. It's your story. So you want people who aren't necessarily going to be prescriptive all the time, who aren't saying, this is how you have to fix it. It's more people who are able to point out, this isn't working for me. I think this is why. And then you get to figure out, okay, how do I want to make this reaction become this reaction instead? What am I missing from there? So having a good writing group that is both cheerleading and willing to tell you when something's not working is so helpful.
And I like what you said about, you still choose whether or not you make those changes. When I advise other writers, I and talk about writing groups, critique groups, I give that same advice, but I also say, if more than one person is giving you that same advice and you don't agree with it, you can choose to ignore it, but it makes sense to pay a little bit more attention, and say, okay, why is that a problem? Mm-hmm. And so, I agree, writing groups are important. And there's different ways of having writing groups. Sometimes it's just having groups of readers.
Yeah.
I've done both. I've been parts of writing groups, and I've also just had, okay, certain readers, look at my work, and you can't succeed without it,
Mm-hmm. Another thing, if you're looking at your book yourself, one of the things, regardless of what issue you're trying to solve, one of the best ways I found is read it aloud.
Yes.
Because that can help you figure out when dialogue is clunky. If you're having a hard time saying it, so are they.
Yeah.
And it's not coming across. If you read aloud, you solve a lot of your grammar and spelling issues, because a lot of times our brains are amazing and they will just fill in what's supposed to be there.
Exactly.
But if you're saying it out loud, your eyes and your brain and your mouth are having to work together, and you'll stumble when something's wrong. And you're like, oh, wait, something's wrong there.
Yes.
It solves so many problems, and it helps you when you're reading it loud again, even to solve problems. You're like, wait a second, weren't they just doing this?
Yeah.
And it can help a lot when you're doing your own self-editing, just to be like, wait a second, there's something off there. And then even if it's not telling you exactly what the problem is right there, it says, look at this closer.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you. In your time as a manuscript editor, have there been any experience with a manuscript or an author that might be of interest to those who are watching this? I know you've talked about a few, but
mostly I think it's just not a specific time, but just the fact that the way that I approach editing is it's a collaborative art. Yes. Because my approach is my job is to help you tell the story you meant to tell in the first place, to get the emotional reactions that you want your readers to feel. And it's so fun for me when I'm reading along to be like, this is amazing, but it's entirely the wrong place. It belongs 3 paragraphs up. It'll
Yeah.
have so much more power. And
Yeah.
I'll recommend that. Or this is great, but here's an even better word that will get exactly what you're going for. And those moments are my absolute favorite in any manuscript, when it's like the aha, I know exactly what to do to make this perfect.
That's great. That's great. And you may have just answered, because my next question was, what's your favorite thing about being an editor? Is it that, or are there other
Yeah, it's
things?
the collaboration. It's the I love words and I love playing with words. I don't like I found I've tried to do my own writing and I really hate bad things happening to my poor characters, but that doesn't usually lead to good stories if
No,
nothing happens to them.
they have to go through pain,
They
make
have
it
to go
an
through
interesting
something.
story. Yeah.
But I have no qualms on having that happen to other people's characters. And so I can make those better. And I just love the chance to move words that someone has created and given me to play with, and just making them into the most beautiful form and having that shared creation. Because ultimately it's still the authors, but I'm like, I helped.
I love that. What advice do you have for those who want to become a professional manuscript editor or evaluator?
So I would say it's good to take classes because it's really important to understand the mechanics of the language. My number one advice is to read, and
Okay.
then read some more, and then read some more after that, and then read some more after that.
Okay.
Because if you are not a reader, then you're not going to understand how those words interplay with each other and how they connect. And the more you read, the better feel you're going to get for what does work and what doesn't work. And if you're reading a book that you're like, this is terrible. Okay, well, why? What's not working for you? And if you're reading a book and you're like, this is the best book I've ever read, great. Why? What is it? And this is works for both authors and
Yeah.
editors. Is what is it that's working for me? Why am I loving this? Or why am I hating this? And sometimes it's, I hate this, but that's the good thing because I should be.
Yeah.
And how are they making me feel so strongly about this? Another way that I found that I've grown my own skills is I've had the chance where, for example, I got to work on Brandon's book, like a couple of Brandon's books, like I've told you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but his editor for years was Moshe Feder,
Okay.
and he's a brilliant editor. He's amazing. And I got a chance. I asked if I could see when I was going to be doing a line edit after his work, if I could see kind of the things, example of a chapter that he had edited and just learning from how he works.
Yeah.
And I've done that with other editors, said, hey, would you mind if I took a look and see an example of a passage that you've edited? And I learned so much, and not all of it's going to be the same. It's an art.
Yeah.
But when you're learning from people who are very, very good at their job, you learn so much, and you can see the kinds of things that they're looking for and the kinds of things that they change. And that's really helped me in my growth as an editor to see, okay, here are some good things to be looking for. I learned a lot early in my career from a really wonderful editing professor named Linda Adams, who unfortunately has passed away since. But just in how to make things more active and ways to approach the language to get to where you want it to be. And so classes, read, and learn from people who are really good at what they do. Would be my top 3.
Excellent. So let's say once they've done that, how do they move into that kind of career? I mean, what kind of opportunities are there? What steps do they take to try to get with a company like Loose Leaf or some other editing service? What's
Yeah.
your suggestion or advice that way?
So that's an excellent question. My path has always been a little non-traditional.
Mm-hmm.
When I graduated, I went to work for an educational publisher for a little while.
Okay.
I found a job listing while still a grad student for someone who was starting a nonprofit, and I was their head editor, only editor for about 20 years.
Okay.
Um, I a lot is word of mouth because when I was at college, I was at BYU, and there was a student-run science fiction and fantasy magazine on campus called The Leading Edge.
Okay.
And I was at there the same time as Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells and Stacy Whitman, who was a publisher of 2 books, imprint of Lee and Low Books in New York. And our whole group, so many went on to either be, and Jancy Patterson was there, and so many went on to be either in the editorial field. Peter Ahlstrom is Brandon Sanderson's VP of editorial at his company.
Okay.
He was there, so was his wife, and so a lot of mine were because I made connections there, and then either they used my work or I became, connections to there. I got the chance to work with Loose Leaf because Christy, who it's her company, I met her through her husband, who was a good friend of mine, and we talked and got to know each other's work. So I've always been mostly through word of mouth. But ways you can is there are freelancing job sites that you can look for. If you have a company that you're interested in working for, you can always contact them, see if they're looking for someone. And a lot of times if they are, then they'll either have a job listing or you can submit an example of your work. A lot depends on what kind of editing you want to do. If you want to do more academia, there's always grad students or PhD students who are looking for someone to edit their theses or dissertations. And that doesn't pay very well, but it's a good way to get in because they don't have much money.
Yeah.
But it's a great way to get into it. And then you can talk to the academic publishers always need an editor. And then over time, you just can build up. And if you're doing a good job, then the people that work with you either will be repeat customers because they really appreciate your work, or they'll mention you to their writer friends and be like, if you need an editor, I know someone who's great. And then you can kind of expand your clientele that way. A lot of times it's just being willing to put yourself out there. Sometimes you can go to conventions and talk to people who are looking to find somebody and kind of work your way that way.
I love all those advice. What do you think about the idea of, I know me as an author and several other authors are always looking for alpha and beta readers,
Mm-hmm.
and most alpha and beta readers don't really get paid. It's just,
Chance to read the story and help out.
to read the story and help out. Is that a good way for someone to get a feel for how to,
I think that's a good way to
edit?
get a feel for kind of what people are looking for, how to do it. So that's definitely, and it's a good way to get an insight into an author's process, which can only help your editing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
If someone wants to take advantage of your services, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So the best way to get in touch with me personally is through my email, which is Kristina, Kristina, at kuglerworld, kuglerworld.com.
Okay.
And that comes to me personally.
Okay. Awesome. Any last words?
Editing is fun. You really do get paid to read. And one of the best experiences I ever had where I literally fulfilled my childhood goal was I was going to be working, and I've done it twice now. I was working on the second book of the series in one and the fourth of a different series that I hadn't read any of the other books and hadn't worked on those. And so I was paid for my time because if you're working on a book in a series, you need to know what happened before. and the style and what they're going for. And so I was literally paid for my time to read a book that I didn't need to do any work on. I just needed to understand. And I was paid to read and not even fix it and just enjoy and learn. And it was at the time the highlight of my career because I was like, childhood goal achieved. I'm being paid to read. And editing is fun. Books are amazing. I'm very passionate about literacy. When my children were in elementary school, I was the PTA literacy person, and I would run competitions for, well, not competition, but challenges to encourage the kids to read, because books are life. Art is life. It's what makes us human. It what helps us understand ourselves and each other. And I don't want to live in a world without books. So read them, write them, work on them, make them happen.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking time with us today. This has been great.
You're very welcome.
I've enjoyed talking with you, and I really enjoyed your evaluation of my book. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. It's a really interesting story. I look forward to hopefully seeing what you do with it.
Thank you.